Okay, so good evening. It is Saturday, April 11th. This is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, here with my daily update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 crisis. I want to thank all of you who've been watching these updates and sending me questions, comments, ideas over the last month or so. It is not a stretch to say that many of those questions or ideas have been passed on to the governor directly or to secretaries um, and others who have been able to take those ideas and put them into action. So keep them coming, and we'll keep trying to take positive action with the best thinking coming from the communities. So today I'm going to give mostly a series of responses to what I'm calling my virtual mailbag. I've told you how many calls, emails I've been getting over the last number of weeks. I've put my email inbox for the last 28 days at about 4,300 unique people who've contacted me. So it has been a unbelievable journey in keeping pace with the stress that people are feeling on the ground. And so today I'm going to be responding to a series of questions that have come in that I haven't had a chance to speak to directly on any of these airings. And so before I get started, I just want to say that yesterday there was 33 new cases that were found in Vermont, and a grand total now of 205 that have been people under the age of 39. And so I mention that because there continues, I think, to be among some a sense that younger people are not likely to contract COVID-19. And the truth is that it's an equal opportunity virus in the sense of people by age. And younger people who are less likely to feel the acute symptoms may not realize they have it and are potentially infecting others. And so it's one of the reasons why we need to be continue to be vigilant and make sure that kids aren't unnecessarily spending time with their friends or peers, possibly infecting people who will then maybe infect their parents. And in the worst case, those parents are in healthcare or some other field where it could have really serious impact. So continue to ask people to respect the stay-at-home order and make sure that we're all doing our part to protect public health. So I'm going to dive right into the questions. I've got about 15 that I had selected for today. Hopefully they'll be of some interest to people and useful. And the first one came, the question was, are gardening stores allowed to remain open as essential businesses? So in previous updates, I've told you that the governor has created effectively a master list of businesses and the types of businesses that are permitted to stay open and those that have to close during this stay-at-home order, which has now been extended to May 15th. Gardening stores are allowed to remain open, and I think one of the reasons the governor made that decision is because for many people, the seeds and other items that they would purchase at a garden store are how they produce a good amount of their food. And so in some ways it's the slow food version of a grocery store. So gardening stores are open to the extent they are selling things that are unrelated. The governor has asked that they restrict access to parts of stores that aren't related to the core business, which has been allowed to remain open. Also, at some of the larger box stores, people have asked questions about whether they'll still be able to buy seeds and starts. And the answer to that, generally speaking, is yes, but they have to provide the safest possible manner and are encouraging as much of that to be done by curbside delivery. So short story, yes, gardening stores can be open. Stores like Gardener's Supply and the Farm All stores and others around the state, some may choose to close. So it's just a permission to be open. Next question. I work for a housing provider. Can we learn if someone who has tested positive for COVID-19 has returned to our congregate housing facility? So The question here speaks to situations where you may have a 20-unit apartment house. It might be senior housing or some other kind of affordable housing. Someone tests positive and is ordered to return home and be in a congregate setting, and the property manager in this case is wondering if the healthcare provider can alert the housing provider about one of the tenants' positive tests. The short answer is, under HIPAA laws, which is a federal law that protects people's health information, the provider cannot, under current conditions, tell anyone other than the patient or anyone the patient has authorized about the positive test. We are looking into this because we have some concern that it may actually put people at unnecessary additional risk if the tenant doesn't decide voluntarily to communicate to the housing provider. So it's a work in progress at present. Unfortunately, HIPAA laws prevent that information from being shared. Next question, and this I've received several communications about today. Why did the governor's team decide to close farmers markets? This one is a tough one because I believe the governor's team closed farmers markets for now with the belief that it would be difficult for a customer to safely go from vendor to vendor and not unnecessarily interact and possibly spread infection. I have asked our Agriculture Committee in the Senate to reach out to the governor's crew, because around the country what we've seen is almost like drive-up farmers markets, some of which have been materializing in Vermont in recent days. And it seems to me that if we can do curbside grocery purchases, we should be able to do curbside farmers markets. And so while we continue to respect the governor's decision-making about restricting the number of business operations that are open in order to slow the spread of the infection, in order to get food, it would seem rather inequitable to allow people to buy less healthy food curbside from restaurants or supermarkets, and then not allow people to buy exactly the same way healthy foods that have been grown locally. So that's a work in progress. We'll keep working on it. Another question, this relates to the latest extension of the stay-at-home order. Question is, can people who work outside and alone return to work in things like gardening, painting, and small contracting? The governor at present has not authorized those activities to go forward because they are not deemed essential, unless in the instance of a small contractor, it was for something that was going to protect someone's safety or prevent a building from falling over. But the governor has communicated to me that while the stay-at-home order has been extended to May 15th, it is possible that in the ensuing month, there may be the opportunity, depending on how the curve looks, of starting to gently ease people back into some of those very types of activities, especially when the person doesn't interact with others in the course of their work. So we hope that there will be progress there. And if we have progress, it will be a sign that things are on the uptick in terms of public health, which will be really good. Next question relates to the process of applying for unemployment insurance, and specifically applying for the new type of unemployment insurance. The question is, I filled out the pre-application as a self-employed individual and then received a snail mail letter saying I had been denied benefits. Why? Well, it's a good question. And if you did not get a chance to watch a committee meeting I hosted yesterday with the Commissioner of Labor, you would have learned a little bit about the answer why. But the short story is that our Department of Labor is using a database system which is more than 30 years old. It is very antiquated. It has effectively run out of options to customize it further. And so while the Department of Labor has encouraged people to fill out this pre-application if you're a self-employed or independent contractor, once that's being done, the system, even though we've invited the person to provide the information, the system is then doing a calculation and saying, well, with my sort of computer brain, they're not eligible. And so an automatic form letter is being sent out. Well, I have to tell you, this feels like a scene in Dilbert. It seems completely maddening to the person who's doing precisely what they were instructed to do, only to receive a confusing letter, which probably results in multiple attempts to reach the Department of Labor to rectify it, all of which are probably met with busy signals. So we asked the Commissioner of Labor to find an alternate pre-application process that does not result in infuriating, inhumane form letters, which are actually irrelevant to the particular circumstances of the individual. But basically, at a time when government has been asked to continue to, quote unquote, do more with less over the years, what that has meant is upgrades for things like IT are often the last things on the list, in part because sometimes they don't go very well. Think back to Vermont Health Connect. And so the executive branch is often very hesitant to invest large sums of money in a project which may have lots of wrinkles. But we're going to make progress on it. Another question, is there any money from any of the federal relief bills to support broadband in Vermont? This has come up a lot in the sense that students who are distributed throughout the state who have to be at home right now are not all capable of having the same internet access, and therefore, from the point of view of distance learning, it can actually create a divide. The federal legislation so far has very little money for general broadband expansion. What it does have is a fairly limited national appropriation that would deliberately target funds to support technological improvements to support distance learning for the K through 12 system. So that is not going to be the kind of dollars that will allow a community that has substandard broadband to suddenly get it. We are hopeful that in the fourth federal relief bill, which we assume the current spat between Republicans and Democrats in the US Senate will go, eventually they will realize that people are in pain and need another relief bill. We hope that that one will include some additional broadband dollars. Also, here in Vermont, our Department of Public Service, which oversees lots of utilities, including some of our telecommunications providers, is asking them wherever possible to go out and do emergency installation of telecom equipment, with the hope that we will ultimately be able to get it funded by FEMA, since it would be part of our emergency response. The legacy of that emergency response would be that we might have upgraded equipment and fiber in places that didn't exist before this pandemic. So the answer for now is there is no current broadband money except a limited amount for K through 12 improvements, but we hope that the next relief bill will send money our way. Another question, I think we will lose our childcare under the Department of Children and Families' new childcare policy for essential workers, because I do essential work from home, and therefore there is someone at home to care for my kid who's home from work or from school. Without getting too confused, I'll just say that when schools closed and most childcare facilities were asked to close, the substitute was that there would be a provision of childcare for quote unquote essential workers, those who made the list of essential workers. That policy has been revised a few times in terms of who's providing the childcare services and who's eligible for it. In a recent guidance that was issued, many childcare providers had to tell parents that they were no longer going to be eligible. However, I'll give an example of a single parent. If a single parent is an essential worker and has to be home because his or her child is at home because of a childcare closure or a school closure, that person clearly cannot be doing their essential work at home and providing care at the exact same time. There is a self-assessment process by which the parent would fill out to determine eligibility. And in my eyes, that would be someone who would continue to be eligible to have childcare subsidy delivered because you can't be doing two things at the exact same time. Another question, Can I still use my community garden plot? Well, throughout the state, we know there are many municipalities and nonprofit organizations that have created community gardens where people divvy it up plot style. There has been nothing to suggest that these must be closed. None of the governor's orders have closed community gardens. However, obviously, we would still expect that people would be spaced appropriately and have all the precautionary masks to protect one another from possible infection. Next question, is anyone monitoring environmental compliance during the shutdown? I think what motivates this question from an emailer is that if many people are working from home in state government, how do we know if permits are being complied with? Environmental permits, I think, was the motivation here. And there's really two answers. One is if there is a particular violation that's going on, which is egregious, a member of the public can immediately call the Agency of Natural Resources and ask for enforcement. And there are people who will go out. I know of at least one case about a week ago where A&R enforcement was out in the field within an hour of being requested to do so. The other thing is, on the Agency of Natural Resources website, they have created guidance for permit holders, which I will put a link to when I'm done with this video. And it provides guidance to those who might fall out of compliance with their permit for reasons that are not related to willful failure to comply, but rather with the crisis that we're facing. You can't get certain permits extended right now. You might not be able to handle materials in quite the same way because vendors may have shut down their operations, so they can't bring stuff to you or take it away. But I will put up the guidance that the Agency of Natural Resources has put out for various permit holders, and I'll let you be the judge of whether you feel comfortable with that. Someone else says, I know people with sewing machines that are in disrepair and they would like to volunteer sewing masks, but the repair people have all closed. So this one, obviously, we would have never thought, 2 months ago, if you had told me that I would be fielding a question like this, I would have said that that was unlikely. The short story is that repair shops are actually allowed to be open. And so if some may have chosen to close, or some may have mistakenly thought that they must close, they can be open. And so I would leave it to the person who asked me the question to contact the particular store or shop in mind, because they are allowed to be open. And hopefully, if that's not the solution, there's some other way, because obviously these masks have been really important to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Next question, can you describe the eviction foreclosure moratorium bill the Senate just passed? And yeah, I'm happy to. Yesterday, as I outlined in yesterday's update, the Senate met for the first time in Vermont history remotely and cast a series of votes on some COVID-19 response measures. One of them was to put a moratorium on all evictions and foreclosures. The bill is in effect from effectively from now to the end of the state of emergency, whenever the governor declares the end of the state of emergency, plus 30 days. A couple important caveats. This does not mean that a tenant is not still obligated to pay the rent. Does not mean that the property owner doesn't still have to send a check to the bank. What it means is that the courts will not move forward with eviction or foreclosure during that period. It would sort of resuscitate itself 30 days after the end of the state of emergency. The primary reason for this is because many of the people who fall behind in rent and are at risk of eviction, we do not want to put them out on the street effectively and put their own health and other people's health at risk. We do not want to add to the homeless numbers right now, because they're a particularly vulnerable population with this virus. And so we believe that this will help on the public health front. And to be clear, about 5 or 6 of the 14 counties in the state, judges have already said they are putting this moratorium in place. The legislation puts a little finer polish to it and applies generally so that you have the same protections, whether you're in Chittenden County or Bennington County or any of the others. So that's what the legislation did. It also still allows for evictions to go forward if people are engaging in criminal activity or are creating a safety hazard for others around them. So this is not a get out of jail free card for people who are very bad actors. Quite the contrary, those could still go forward. But it's a recognition that this is not the time to put someone out on the streets in general. Next question, will there be hazard pay for food service providers who are feeding Vermont's kids? Well, this one there's not a simple answer to this one, but I'll give a couple parts. First off, some school districts may offer some additional compensation as a result of this crisis. Many who work in our K through 12 system are unionized. Some of those contracts may have provisions. I'm not familiar. They may have provisions which provide additional boost in pay under certain circumstances. So in those instances, they would get extra pay. The federal government is considering a fourth relief bill, in which case at least some members of the U.S. Senate are talking about some kind of what they call hero pay or hazard pay of large sums of money. Now, who would be eligible for that has not been made clear. Here in Vermont, I have asked 4 members of the Senate to brainstorm ideas to provide essential worker hazard pay or boost or hero pay, whatever the terminology people want to choose, because we do not want the only people who get no federal relief to be the ones who are going to work and putting themselves at risk. I expect that by Monday or Tuesday, this Senate work group will have some ideas. Obviously, we're prioritizing those who make the least and are at the most risk, to the extent that food service providers may fall into that category, especially places like food shelves and food pantries, that they might be good candidates. Another question. Someone says, I drove by Lowe's the other day and it looked like Black Friday in the parking lot, meaning the whole parking lot was full. And I think the general idea is if we're in a stay-at-home order, why are all those people at the store? The governor has not ordered home repair supply stores like Lowe's or Home Depot or Curtis Lumber, other places like that, to close. Has encouraged as much of the sales, especially of things that aren't directly related to the exemption they have to continue to operate, to be sold online or by phone and picked up curbside. So what I'm hoping is it was just the clumsy first days of online ordering and curbside delivery. Obviously, some people aren't quite getting the picture that if you don't really need to go out, you should probably stay home. But my hope is that this was an anomalous day. It was the first day with the particular Lowe's working through the kinks. Here's a question. This came from a nonprofit that works with many employers. Must an employee use up all their paid time off, like vacation time and sick leave, before qualifying to collect unemployment for temporary unemployment? So to re-summarize that question, if you're being temporarily laid off, do you have to use up all your vacation and sick time before you can collect unemployment insurance benefits? I checked in with the Department of Labor. The answer is no. Those accrued benefits that you're entitled to can be sort of reserved for when you come back. And once you're laid off, you can immediately begin your enrollment process and proceed to try to get your benefits up and running. So that's a handful of questions that have come in over the last week or so. Please keep them coming. They're really helpful. Some of the questions that you heard tonight are things that obviously indicate a need for further follow-up with the governor and his team, which I'm committed to doing. Tomorrow, I'm going to post a video at 5:30. It's the first time I'm not going to do a live video in, I believe, a month. It is Easter, and so in celebration of that, I'm not going to be tending to Facebook at all. But we'll post a video at 5:30, and it's going to be a bit different than the updates I've been doing. I'm really going to spend some time and provide some informal reflection on the people who I've encountered with the state's response to this crisis, beginning with the governor, lieutenant governor, members of the House and Senate, and community members. So it'll really be a bit of a 10,000-foot view of what it's been like to work alongside the people who are primarily charged with keeping the public safe, and hopefully share some insights on the human side of your government decision makers who are trying to get us through this, both from a public health point of view and an economic point of view. So for all of you celebrating holidays in the last days and going through this weekend, I hope you celebrate them safely, and hope you'll check out the video tomorrow, and then I'll be back with a live update on Monday. See ya.